I haven't done anything yet. Welcome back to the Footbridge Theatre. I imagine it's been quite some time for most people here. Before we start, I do want to acknowledge that we're gathered together here this evening on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And of course, we pay our respects to elders past, present, people who have looked after this place for millennia. I don't want to brush over this quickly. I want to take a moment to think about just what sort of place this is. Many of you will know the parkland just down the hill here, where there is a lake now, a lake that was once the meeting of fresh and salt water, an important gathering and meeting place for people who would travel to that place along what is now City Road and Parramatta Road to exchange knowledge, to teach, to experience each other's way of being. The quadrangle building, and I'm thinking here of a story that was told to me by Jacqueline Troy, an Indigenous linguist here, who describes this quadrangle as a quintessentially blackfella building, which is kind of odd because it looks like a fantasy of Oxbridge to me. But she explained that the wood that was used to construct the building was taken from a copse of trees that stood on that hill above a slope that was known as the Kangaroo Flats, the Kangaroo Grounds, where kangaroos were hunted, driven up the hill around ceremony and tangled in the trees. Extraordinary. She said that the sandstone that forms the quadrangle was quarried just down the hill there, and the mortar that holds those blocks together was taken from the middens that have been developed over tens of thousands of years. She said it's a blackfella building. So I like to bear that in my awareness as I work in this place. My name's Ian Maxwell. I'm the discipline lead of the discipline of Theatre and Performance Studies here at the university, and I'm your host tonight. And I just want to say a couple of words about the Rex Cramphorn Lecture Series. Many of you will have known Rex, who died in 1991. A revolutionary, visionary director, designer, person of the theatre. Upon his death, a bequest was set up to support an annual lecture series, the Rex Cramphorn Lectures, which commenced in 1996, and there were 14 consecutive Rex Cramphorn Lectures, Memorial Lectures, given alternatively in Sydney and Melbourne in venues like Seymour Centre, Belvoir Street, I think in the Playbox Theatre in the Malthouse in Melbourne. And the lectures will be transcribed and published in the pages of Australasian Drama Studies. And a series of very important people gave lectures, from Rhoda Roberts to Jim Sharman, to Barry Kosky, to Lyndon Terracini, Lindy Davis, etc. Those lectures did stop in, I think, 2010, after 14. Sometimes projects run their course. Sometimes a body of work is made that stands by itself. I suspect also a lot of things happened over those years to gatherings like this. There used to be a number of lecture series, the Philip Parsons Lecture Series, for example, around the performing arts in this city, and somewhere along the way we've lost touch with that practice. So it's actually nice to see people come along tonight. The bequest is still there and still has a pot of money, which we're obliged now to spend on a public lecture series. So this year we are relaunching the Rex Cramphorn Memorial Lecture Series, number 15, and here we are. And more excitingly, we're opening it with forced entertainment. Now, when Barbara discovered that Forced Entertainment were visiting to perform in Adelaide, she leapt on the opportunity to invite them over here for a Sydney exclusive, so we've got them tonight. Forced Entertainment have only performed once in Sydney at the 2016 Sydney Festival, and that was also the year that they received the prestigious International Ibsen Award. Earlier this month, they've returned to Australia to the Adelaide Festival to present Complete Works, Tabletop Shakespeare, in which each of the 6 cast members takes it in turns to perform each of Shakespeare's 36 plays, using simple household props to stand in for the characters, while the mechanics of the play are narrated live and the objects moved around on a tabletop stage. So, and they're taking that next week, maybe this weekend, to Tasmania. So we invited them here. So tonight we'll be hearing from Tim Etchells, the artistic director and co-founder, who I've got a biog here that's worth reading. Awarded an honorary doctorate by Darlington College of the Arts. He was Legacy Thinker in Residence, there's a gig, at the Tate Research and the Life Development Agency in London, and visiting Honorary Professor, School of Arts at Roehampton University, and Professor of Performance at Sheffield University. He was Artist of the City of Lisbon in 2014 and won the Spalding Gray Award in 2016, which is awarded by a consortium of US performance institutions, including PS 122 New York, the Walker Arts Centre Minneapolis, the Andy Warhol Museum Pittsburgh, and On the Boards in Seattle, who referred to him as a fearless innovator of theatrical form. Under Etchells' direction, Force Entertainment won the International Ibsen Prize in 2016, and he won the Manchester Fiction Prize in 2019. We also have Terry O'Brien with us, co-founder of the company, who has a long history of engagement as a lecturer, mentor and collaborator with other artists. She's also been a creative fellow at Roehampton and Birmingham universities, worked with the RSC and the Shakespeare Institute in Stratford, and in 2011 she became Professor of Contemporary Theatre and Performance Practice at the University of Sheffield. In 2022 she was awarded an honorary doctorate from the University of Lund in Sweden, and I love this, now she's doing a PhD. So doing doctoral research at the University of Salford, investigating improvised text in post-dramatic theatre and its possibilities for working with young people and non-professional groups. And I also wanted just to acknowledge also that Robin Arthur, another colleague from Force Entertainment, is with us and will be running some workshops in the discipline, I'm not allowed to call it a department anymore, discipline of theatre and performance studies. So that's me out. It's up to me now to invite Terry to the stage. Terry O'Connor.
Thank you very much, Ian, and thank you all for coming. I'd like to start briefly with a few thanks of my own. Thanks to Barbara Campbell for this invitation to come to the discipline of performance and theatre studies. No, theatre and performance studies. And thanks to everybody within the staff for making us feel so welcome. We're very honoured to be welcome to the University of Sydney and welcome to this Gadigal and Eora land. Thank you. As Ian said, I'm joined by my colleague Tim Etchells on Zoom, and there's going to be a chance to ask him some questions later. But I'm also joined in the auditorium by my friend and colleague Robin Arthur, and we're here doing a week of presentations, practice work, and discussions with students and staff and members of the wider artist and pedagogic community in Sydney. And we would like to say a really big thank you for this chance to connect and to collaborate and to question with academics and non-academics about this puzzling business of making performance. So thank you very much for having us. Okay, Geordie, thank you as well for all your work. And thank you to those people who've worked on the ABC recording for this evening. Thank you. Could we lose the lights, please? Terry, please speak these words I have written. Take time with them. Take your time with them. Speak these words. And for the next 40 minutes or so, don't speak words beyond these you see here on this page and on the pages that follow. As you speak, or more correctly, through and with your speaking, I'd like to think around the act already begun here, the act made possible through our cooperation, this iteration of the simple, theatrical, performative staple that is one person speaking through another or others. We could frame it in the first instance as an exercise in power, not an appealing framework in which to begin, I know. But there is no point in ducking the obvious. I mean, the sense in which what's happening here and now, as in so much theatre proper, might be understood as a kind of puppeting, a cooperative performance through which a most likely absent author's words are made manifest at distance in and from the mouth of another. The author speaking, though absent, silent. The performer speaking, but also silent in terms of their own utterance. Seen in this way, there is a kind of sadism in the setup, as at the core of literary theatre itself, of course, the utterance of one at the expense of or delivered through the servitude of the other. Performer as messenger, mute speaker, avatar, meat puppet, stand-in, proxy, servant to the text, to the author, sounding out words on behalf of another. Speak these words I have written. Yes, yes. But while that rings in the air, we know that there are other forces at work here in your reading this text, a set of energies and affinities that go beyond such antic mechanics of remote control. For one, there's the matter of our long collaboration. It's not that you have stepped up to read here as a dispassionate substitution, a gig economy outing to read the words of a random stranger. Instead, your words and mine, your presence and mine are already tangled over years through so many collaborative performance-making projects in forced entertainment. Texts written by me and spoken by you. Texts improvised by you in response to instructions or prompts from me. Or texts improvised by you and live redirected or edited by me, or texts that mix writing and improvisation to such an extent that one can't any longer unpick authorship. We've also endlessly improvised together in durational performances by the group like Quizula and On the Thousandth Night, where the audience are free to come and go as we work on stage for stretches of 6 to 24 hours. It's long time and long haul, this work. Like the circumstances of our present connection, long time and long duration, and in more ways than one. We've been bound up together since the early days, 1980s, in Exeter, where we studied, and then Sheffield in the north of England, where forced entertainment began. Making performance together since all that time back, since another millennia, since another austerity capitalism ravaged another earth, since another global politics played out around, through and from the historical misdemeanors of another Europe, since another instability ran riot in another highly but differently mediatized climate of fear. From Khrushchev to Gorbachev to Putin, from Carter, Reagan to Obama to Trump and Biden, then back to Trump. From Heath, Wilson to Thatcher to Blair, to the short-lived idiocies of Cameron, May and Truss, and then the equivocations of Starmer. Through all that time, we've worked from Forced Entertainment's base in Sheffield, 3 women and 3 men in the core group, to make performance in a context I only half-jokingly call an unbearable intimacy. Well, we can say that the work became a kind of life practice as well as an artistic collaboration, arriving at a theatre authored and owned collectively by the group, spun from the mix of our different opinions, inclinations, and aptitudes. Forced Entertainment is an idealistic project, but with a pragmatism that usually saves it from the worst utopian absurdities. It's a project founded on processes of improvisation, discussion, revision, rethinking, and difference of opinion, not arising from an initial consensus, but only ever finding stability or resolution by way of trial and error, constant negotiation, and tweaking of detail. It's also a project which, by regular logic, should perhaps not have survived. It's certainly not a given that a group of students drifting together one summer to a formerly industrial city in the north of England to set up an arts experiment would still be there, working together collaboratively more than 40 years later. Or that one of this same group would read aloud the words of another to an audience in a lecture hall on the other side of the world, as you do there today. Please speak these words I have written. Proximate and distant, exterior and interior, present and absent. We are here again at this impasse, at the border between us. Another thing that saves us, thankfully, from the pure mechanics of this transaction is that even when silent, albeit speaking my words, you are nonetheless fully present there on stage in Sydney. You speak my words, but in your voice, with your inflections and energies, in relation to your body, your posture, your gestures, your taking your time, your own time. For all that I may seek to ladle, flow, or structure it here, on the screen or page with my words, my line breaks, my dashes, my commas, my semicolons. In the end, you're up there and I'm not, such that any me appearing present, summoned or imagined in that room today through the presentation can only ever be there insofar as determined and articulated through you. Reading these words, of course, you can make me eloquent or else reduce me to linguistic and semantic rubble. You can speak me into being soft and thoughtful or harsh and argumentative. You can flow with the direction and momentum of the text, or you can break it awkwardly here or there. You can find a new line or rhythm through what's written here, coherent yet to me unexpected. Or you can hopscotch through the paragraphs, making scant or broken lines, leaving me in mismatched jigsaw pieces. I'm in your hands. And there are so many ways to open or remake the situation through your reading of the text. You can step close to me, can't you? Speak this as if you too were thinking it. Or you can hold me off at some distance. Elaborate the action of reading by tracing the lines of the type on the page to indicate your labour, your scrutiny of the words. Sharpen slightly or flatten your voice and cadence as if to say, I speak, obey the letter of the law to present aloud these words I find on the page, but no more. I speak these words, but do not stand with them. I speak these words, but do not allow them to speak for me. We know some of this stuff about distance and proximity to texts quite well, don't we? From our collaborations in and out of forced entertainment since the early 1980s, work in which there's been a long conversation about the business of being, doing, speaking, and reading in public, in performance, the business of writing and its relation to speaking, the act of speaking writing, as well as the act of simply speaking. Perhaps the strongest early plunge into this territory was through the forced entertainment work Speak Bitterness, made in 1997, which takes the form of a marathon public confession by 8 performers behind a long metal table. Constituting the audience as one gathered for a show trial or public hearing, the text for Speak Bitterness is a catalogue built using the forms we are guilty of and we confess to, the lines of which are printed on hundreds of A4 pages and scattered on the tabletop, ready to be selected and read aloud in any sequence by the performers over the work's long duration. Throughout the performance, the nature and constituency of that we in the text is under sustained question. And it's always a fiction too, of course. The pronoun always marking an aspirational, imagined, or speculative community that comes into being through the statements of the performers. Their confessional statements mix everyday failings. We confess to sleeping in on Sundays and fooling around. We're guilty of fidgeting, finding, and forgetting. We ate the last biscuit. We never washed up properly or took the dogs out for a walk. With other more troubled realities, atmospheres and textures, invoking a social collective that is harder to accommodate in the genial, liberal space of the theatre. We were date rapists. We were homophobes, Trump voters, narcissists. We pushed dog shit through immigrants' doors. Clearly divisive, these kinds of confessions cleave speakers from watchers, often appearing to isolate the performers who read them from the others beside them, even on the stage. The social fractures the text produces are felt in the auditorium too, each spectator aware of their implied complicity and distance from the spoken text. Its active rhetorical force pulling the we of the crowd towards different social configurations, no matter how unsettling the new formations that it authors might be. We were tongue-tied. We kept secrets. We said more than we meant to say. We gave things away. Tell Sydney that reading these confessions in the 6 hours of speak bitterness, we learnt a lot about stepping close to and stepping back from the meaning of a text whilst reading it aloud. Tell them what it meant to claim ownership of language in that way, testing it and testing one's relation to it. What it meant to throw away the meaning of a line or insert great distance even whilst reading it. Behind the table, we were reading soft and penitent, as if we meant it all, no matter how absurd the misdemeanors named. Or we were reading like idiots. Or we were speaking the lines one by one, taking time and care, holding carefully each image, each micro-narrative. Or we were gabbling through pages of text at high speed, as if the point were only to say it all, not to demonstrate emotional connection or psychological complicity, just to speak it out, to get through it all, a formality, to confess to everything before the case can be closed. And key in all of this, of course, is distance. The fact that the text is on the table, in the hand. That speech, when it comes, is in the first instance in relation to an exterior, not in relation to an interior. We are back here again. You reading me. In theatre proper, of course, distances of this kind are not always appreciated when it comes to spoken text. Rather, by contrast to the situation of reading, speech in theatre is meant to be memorised and internalised, to allow written text an illusionistic assimilation into the speaking subject of the performer. Perhaps the measure of good acting in this particular sense is a one-to-one mapping of text on and into the speaker, a process of collapse and becoming in which speaker and text by another are experienced as an indivisible unity or singularity. Kate Blanchett is Juliet. Mel Gibson is Jesus Christ. Richard Burton is whoever. I'm not sure you saw the long complaining email Forced Entertainment got some years ago, reacting to our performance adaptation of Sophie Cowell's text and image artwork, Exquisite Pain. I remember the email focused on the appalling fact that the performers were reading. They were reading. They hadn't learnt the text. For the writer of this email, this alone was enough to disbar the work completely from the category of theatre. The essential goal of the form being, from their perspective, that complete elision of speaker and text mentioned before. In Exquisite Pain, as in Speak Bitterness, and in our much later work, The Notebook, we were chasing other things, though. We wanted distance between performers and text, wanted the performers to appear not swathed or masked in what they were speaking, but sitting with the text as an object, a trace, a relic, a material artifact under scrutiny and investigation. From that position, text visible, in hand, or before them on a table, they could indeed approach the object with a kind of Brechtian leverage. The presence of the text on the table in Speak Bitterness and Exquisite Pain is a floating quotation mark and de facto break to theatrical illusion. There's a tendency, clearly in the mind of that angry email person, to think that reading aloud produces a kind of generic distance in respect of a text, as if reading were bound to produce a uniform non-acting, a distant and flat tone. Instead, what we learnt is that while reading aloud from the texts comprising the performance frames a narrow bandwidth in which to work, it also contains almost infinite possibilities for emotional and intellectual shading. I'd say any conversations we ever had about the nuances, perils, pitfalls, and opportunity of acting, we had again and again when working on Exquisite Pain, more fiercely and with more attention to detail. Reading, always reading, one can lean into or away from the text in all directions, appearing to own it, eliding one's presence with its apparent tone or gravity, or by stepping away critically, raising an eyebrow, adopting an ironic tone. There on stage in Sydney, you hold the text in your hands. Perhaps you refer to it as it lies on a lectern of some kind before you. The pages, a constant reminder that you and I are not the same here, that your voice has an origin outside rather than within. You there speaking, and me just an ink trace spilled over paper, awaiting activation through your eyes, cognition, vocal apparatus. I'm fading into you, aren't I? It's your evening, I think, and my early morning. My Tuesday and your... I'm losing track. For me, practice is something that begins very often, almost always, without a question. It begins, more likely, in the studio, with an unexplained fascination or curiosity about something, a stubborn image or a slither of text that seems problematic or dynamic, an action that charges the room for some reason. For reasons at first that I don't understand. These things for me, for all of us in the group, I think, tend to precede any intellectual reason, and as such, precede the formulation of questions. The work, in this sense, is a kind of attending to the world and to materials. Such questions as there are will arise directly from that material. No ideas, the poet William Carlos Williams says, except in things. No ideas except in things. The work in this theatre isn't a tool or an instrument. It's a problematic object without purpose. Or better yet, it's a practice, an always changing, always unfolding way of doing, looking and being. Indeed, marking the collaborative, exploratory nature of our practice, I want to insist on making theatre, making performance as a process in which no single object or material, no single impulse, no single human intention, writerly or directorial, no single frame of understanding, no single thematic, no single conceptual frame, no single inspiration, no single vision, no single factor of any kind either rules, determines, holds sway, or serves as primary guidance. I want to write about the creation and rehearsal process as one in which, for a good while at least, many diverse elements and impulses circulate all the time in a constant push and pull with each other, a process of dialogue, contradiction, displacement, contraction, and expansion. I want to write about the rehearsal process, the creation process, as one in which the event or object of the performance itself will appear only through this dynamic interaction of multiple materials, frames, desires, intentions, accidents, and without recourse or reference to a single, guiding object, question, conception, or vision. A space in which, at least from the outset, there is no fixed line, no fixed centre. Terry. Tell Sydney that years ago I interviewed Ron Vorter, the extraordinary performer from the Worcester group who died in 1994. And that Ron told me about how he'd first drifted into acting, starting work at the Performing Garage as their bookkeeper, doing their accounts. His first role, he said, was being asked onto the stage by Richard Schechner to continue his work on the finances during the performances each night. A Brecht piece, I think. Later, under Liz Lecomte, he graduated from this kind of matrixed performance to playing Spalding Gray's father in a series of Worcester Group pieces. Ron told me about it in pragmatic terms. There were a series of letters from Spalding's father that featured in the pieces, and since Spalding's father was not there to speak his own words, it fell to him, Ron, to read the letters aloud. Tell Sydney that he rationalised his role as that of standing in for an absent person, of reading Spalding's father's words into the record of the performance in the same way one might do at a trial. Tell Sydney that Ron and I spoke about Brecht in that same conversation, recalling the poem about the street accident and the witness charged with recounting it in detail, event by event, so that those who had not seen what happened could make their own fair judgments. There is something explicit here about the burden of the witness, the ethical bind of the stand-in, the necessity for a certain evenness of attention, a fairness to the gaze and to the account, a desire in the end to represent what happened without argument or spin. The task to present things calmly in their full complexity. Or tell Sydney about Jim Fletcher performing the monologue I wrote for him, called "Sight is the sense that a dying person tends to lose first." That Jim spoke each line of the text as if it were as important and as unimportant as any other. There was only the faintest of dramaturgies in his speaking. I think of his approach as demonstrating a kind of democracy of attention. Tell Sydney about our durational performance, 12 a.m, awake and looking down, with its great catalogue of characters whose names are scrawled on cardboard placards, and how the performers change costumes constantly throughout the piece, attempting to appear temporarily as all those myriad figures, real and imagined, banal and fantastical. The hypnotized girl, a 9-year-old shepherd boy, night shift Dave, the comeback kid, Marcy, pregnant, lost Lisa, the ex-wife of the ex-president of the United States. Tell them that 12 a.m. is theatre as dressing-up box and kaleidoscopic narrative. Tell them about the strange task it engenders of measuring oneself against all of those figures and many, many, many more. That strange task of standing in briefly for everyone and anyone. Tell them that acting is a way of creating emotional and other kinds of proximity and connectivity, but that it is also a way, that it's also always a way of measuring distance. I am. I am not. I am. I am not. I am. I am not. Tell Sydney about all the times that any of us in the company stood in for any other one of us. The whole business of emergency and not so emergency replacement so that shows can happen. Tell Sydney that you worked towards replacing Claire in Real Magic a few years back when we thought she might be too sick to perform. Tell them you were rehearsing for days, walking Claire's path, searching for her timings, choices and energies, and then never performing it at all. Tell them that aside from unavoidable substitutions of accident, injury or extreme diary crash, we tend not to transfer material created by one performer in rehearsals to another. i.e., we try to let actions or functions generated by one person in the process stay with that person as a project develops. It's mainly the material generated easily or naturally by one person won't play so well transferred to another. The two will have different presence, energy, timing, authority. They'll take space differently, deal with the business of being in public differently, deal with their being human in different ways. Tell them that by the time a piece of material belongs to a certain person on stage, I will very likely have come to rely on the fact that it is passing through the very specific filter of their presence, energy, and sensibility. The material and the piece will be built around that. And if it were to change, then that would necessitate more changes, and those things would also necessitate more changes. Tell Sydney that for all our not knowing where we are headed in a kind of process, a key factor in our work over 40 years has been excessive attention to the details of time, event, and presence. Tell Sydney that it came with the video camera. That from the moment we had the video camera, the work changed, because from that point on, we could always go back to the recordings of rehearsal improvisations. We could check what people were really doing, check the comparative timings, the synchronization, the position and duration of silences, the particularities of movements, the specific choices of words. Tell Sydney that Jerry, who performs with Forced Entertainment very often, was once an understudy in a West End show. 3 weeks of learning the part and a few rehearsals, and then 10 months of waiting in the dressing room, listening to the performance coming through from the stage on the intercom and being ready, trying to be ready, waiting to step in, waiting to stand in. Terry, tell Sydney that I was once asked by a Polish curator to do a project in the Eastern Partnership countries, the so-called post-Soviet states of Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. How they wanted me to go on a journey through several weeks, visiting Tbilisi, Kiev, Baku, Chisinau, and so on. And that I had to say, no, I couldn't do it. The timing was impossible, as it was impossible for me to be here in Sydney today. The only way I could do the project, I said, was if they let me send someone else, a proxy for the journey, a stand-in. They said, yes, okay. So I thought a bit, and I asked my brother, someone even closer to me than you, I guess, and tell them in Sydney that he did go on the trip, taking 10 long days, travelling like a maniac in the summer heat. Tell them that in each place I arranged that Mark would meet 2 strangers, any kind of persons, variety of ages and occupation, most often unconnected to the arts. I asked that each of these strangers take Mark to places in their city, places that for them had a story. I asked that they take him there and tell him something, anything. Tell him the story linked to the place. I didn't have a question, not really. I was looking for whatever came up, for whatever happened, for what was there. It was a kind of blind looking, as I already mentioned, an act of searching conducted at a distance. When Mark got to Kiev, a woman called Nina took him to a place looking down on the city. She said that she had come to this exact place when she was a child, sometime in April 1986. She said that she'd been at school that day, an old-style Soviet school, where, as the daughter of a teacher, she was studying with the daughters of labourers and concert pianists and the daughters of factory workers, politicians, and midwives. And that one day, that April, her almost best friend, the daughter of a nuclear scientist, told her in confidence something her father had said the night before. Specifically, that there had been an accident at Reactor 4 in the nearby Chernobyl plant, involving leaks of cesium-137 at such and such an amount. And tell Sydney that Nina told Mark that she'd gone home that afternoon and told this story to her mother. And her mother, a science teacher, as luck would have it, had looked more worried than she'd ever seen her, and that she asked Nina specifically in the numbers her friend had mentioned in relation to the leaks. And Nina told her, and her mother asked her if she was sure about the numbers, and she said yes, she was sure. And tell Sydney that Nina told Mark that when she said that she was sure, her mum nodded and told her to immediately pack her bags and her school certificates. And once the bags were packed, they went to town. And tell Sydney that Nina told Mark that her mum took their money from the bank right away, took all of it, and they went to Moscow that evening by train. And they did not return to Kiev until 5 years later. Tell Sydney that Nina told Mark that only the next day, the day after their departure, did the Chernobyl accident make the papers at all. A small story, one that would get bigger in the next days, and that the next day, the banks were closed, and the train station closed also, and travel away from the region pretty much forbidden. And tells Sydney that Nina told Mark that that was why she'd taken him there, to that place with a great view of the city, because that's the last place that she'd gone that night with her mother before they went to the train. And she thought, Nina thought, she might never get back there to Kiev again, that it might never be safe, that her mum said no, they might never go back. And tells Sydney that each place Mark went to as my stand-in, my proxy researcher without a question, he met fantastic people and stories. And tells Sydney that he surely found things, better things and people and stories than I would have found, because he's much more sociable and much more a communicator than me. He has a gift of connection. That is a quality he has. And tells Sydney that this methodology I've been describing, if that is really what it is, this same methodology can operate in the rehearsal room just as well. Tells Sydney that sometimes it's best not to know what you're looking for, that it is a lucky thing, a beautiful thing to send other people on journeys in the rehearsal room and outside of it to see what they will find. That knowledge comes from finding as much as it does from searching. That certain kinds of looking are more open than others. A democracy of attention. Terry, please speak these words I have written. Take your time. Your evening, my morning, I think. You're on one side of the world and I'm on the other. Is this text a way of creating proximity or measuring distance? You can see that the page below is blank after this paragraph. I'm disappearing as ever, soon to be out of here. One last favour to ask, though. When I'm gone, can you take a minute or two to describe what you see in your own words, not mine? I would like to see that room through your eyes and words right now. Take care. Let me know what you see. Let me know what you find. And thanks for reading these, the last of the words. So I see about, I don't know how many people, but a full audience. I can see a man smiling, and I can see a woman holding the side of her face, and the audience is separate from me because there's a large orchestra pit between us. And right at the back I can see a red light. I don't know what that is. And I can see a red fire hose and lights in the ceiling, a white shirt, another white shirt, a blue scarf, a stripy shirt, stripy t-shirt, someone pulling down their sweater. Maybe it's getting cold in the auditorium. People are still, mostly still, looking. You can see Robin and a few faces I recognise. A mustard-coloured jacket. Some people wear glasses. Some lights on the steps leading up to the exit sign. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, it falls to me to break the spell of that extraordinary, lilting, incantory, swaying meditation on time and distance, on the unbearable intimacy of voicing someone's words. Wow. We are about, well, I mean, that was so sort of elegiac, this re-establishing of distance at the end as we faded out of the story, and suddenly Tim felt so far away. But now, with the magic of technology, welcome Tim Etchells.
Yeah. Hey. Thank you.
Of course, Tim, you've been very present for us over the last 45 minutes, and it's one of those difficult things after a presentation like that. I just want to sit by myself and think for a little bit, yeah? But we do have about 20 minutes to take some questions. I wonder if the first thing to do is to simply ask Tim whether he wants to say anything off the bat, now that you loom above us in resplendent green. Over to you.
Maybe I've said enough, albeit remotely. But no, I was very touched by Terry's reading, and spending this time in Switzerland projecting myself into a room that I can't see except via Terry's description. And it was making me think about this process of working with and through others, and about the possibilities of remote contact and remote working. It's a very strange form of intimacy that we have across this distance. But I was feeling it very strongly, despite the miles and the time zones. It's a real pleasure to be connected in this way. And thanks again for the invitation. It's really appreciated.
That's great. I mean, it is, we are so used these days to these kind of engagements with people and that front-on presentation of people's faces. And that moment, Tim, when you lifted your hands into the foreground, and we do for a moment collapse into this resonant togetherness, which then explodes again. But enough from me. We have two roving microphones, Paul Dwyer up there and Barbara Campbell over there. So we do have some moments to share some comments or questions for either Tim or Terry. Do I see any hands? Yeah, I've got one down here. Straight up one.
Thank you very much for both the performance and the talk itself. Both of them were very stimulating. And I hope it's appropriate, but I did want to actually ask about the performance. However, the question can be answered by both of you, depending on what you take up from it. You mentioned Donald Trump several times early on in the text itself, and I thought that would be a good place to start, actually. One of the things that I'll always associate with Donald Trump is that you can tell when he's reading. You can tell when he shifts into recitation style,
And there's this abrupt change, unlike many other public speakers, especially people like him, politicians, between the spontaneous style and the recitation style. This was all recitation style, if I may. So I'd like to throw that out there for a comment, but I'd also want to ask you, how do you prepare to do recitation style when you're performing a text like this, or this text in particular? Feel free to comment further. What's it like to read? How do you prepare for doing not just the reading, but also the showing us that you're doing the reading?
It is, thank you for that. Reading as a kind of performance, I think, is almost one of my favourite performance tasks. And it is something, as Tim wrote in the piece, that's been written into the history of forced entertainment's work. We've done a number of projects that have involved reading the text. You ask specifically how I prepare. Well, by reading it in my head, but also, I mean, a bit like the way in which Tim describes searching, without a sense of the direction. I do also like the fact that when you read a text in public, you hit it, you meet it, you interpret it kind of in the moment. Well, yeah, somehow you feel it with the audience, or with the sense of the people that you've got in front of you. So I think, it's certainly not about reading it out loud in my bedroom in Darlington. It's about reading and thinking about the words, and then just letting the performance happen. And I think there's something in that that's akin to a lot of the forced entertainment kind of emphasis on the liveness of the event in the theatre, that somehow even when you sort of know what you're going to do physically, or you've done an improvisation many times before and certain things are fixed, it's always about kind of, recharging that by somehow trying to find a connection with the audience.
Maybe I can also add something a little there. I realized at a certain point, a few years ago, but that one of the things that kind of underpins my practice in different areas is collecting language, I say. So I think of myself as much as a collector of language as I do as a writer. And for me, writing and collecting language are quite linked. But I realized at a certain point that one of the things that I was doing by collecting phrases or sentences or paragraphs or combinations of words, writing them down in a notebook, one of the things that I was doing was concocting circumstances where I could, in performance and in other ways, speak out those words, speak them aloud. And I realized that wanting to speak out those things that I'd collected, maybe I'd written stuff down from a conversation or from a dream or from a piece of graffiti or from the newspaper, the desire to speak them out was indeed a desire to, as Terry was talking about, a desire to try to understand them. And there's something about speaking words out in public that is a kind of investigatory instrument, I think. As much preparation as you can do, there's also that sense that as one speaks, words are landing in a context with an audience, with a listener, with a conversation partner, and it's only in the speaking out that the potential resonances or the actual resonances of something become clearer. So I think I just would double down on Terry's comment, really, that it's this sort of live moment of testing the material that's really the attraction and the focus.
And I'd want to add to that, having watched Terry over the last couple of days, put yourself at that desk and say some of those words in anticipation of these people being here. A bit like, when you move house with a cat and you put butter on the cat's paws, so they just start to feel at home because they're spending all their time. There's something in the performative, the skill. Oh, come on, I'm being dead serious. The skill of a performer to come into a new place and feel that it's their place, to try some of those words and then wait for these people to come. Yeah. More questions up here.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for that. That was wonderful. Two-part question. First, did you have blocking in your script? I was questioning every time you drank water whether that was written in the script.
No, that was just
Just
improvised.
thirst?
That was
Yeah, that was-
improvised drinking of water.
You're very good. You're very good. Second one, you were talking a lot about the concept of distance between writer and performer. Obviously, you guys have been creating for such a long time. Have you had many experiences of performance over time? So coming back to something that you've created a long time ago and kind of that distance of self, past versions of yourself, or, yeah.
Over to you, Tim.
Yeah, that was a big throw to you, Tim.
I mean, I think that process is sort of, I think, quite deep in the company's work in two senses. One, in a very immediate sense, very often a performance work will be constructed from reconstructions of improvisations that have taken place in the preceding months or even year. So as a performer, folks will end up, redoing in March 24 what they first improvised spontaneously in, say November 23. So it can be a 6-month gap there between one, weird Thursday afternoon where we did something that we found compelling and charming and useful in terms of the piece, and then 6 months later it's a cog in a bigger machine. So, and I think there's a process there for people whereby whatever your initial impulses for something were, you have to sort of either reconnect them or construct new impulses to guide you through the same, quite precise shape of material. So that's a skill that I think folks have. It's something we've worked on rather painstakingly since we had a video camera, and we could really capture improvisations in detail in the sort of early 90s. We became quite obsessive with that. But the other thing I'm thinking about, which is maybe more the question that you had, is that, we do, of course, from time to time go back quite a long way to pieces. I mean, let's say something like First Night, which we made in 2001, and which we, I think, most recently performed in 2016, maybe. So I was 15 years old at the time. I think doing that, you are, certainly as a performer, you're stepping back into material that you generated probably through improvisation, years and years and years before. And it's interesting to all of us, I think, that, of course, we're getting older. Many of the pieces were made, when we were in our late 20s, early 30s, 40s. Most of us are 60 plus now. So your body's changing, your presence is changing, your attitude to time is changing. Everything tastes different and sits different. And I think going back to older pieces, I think there's some pieces that we just wouldn't do, because I think we'd feel like it would be a bit ridiculous to be inhabiting that that particular world. But there's certain pieces that I think we really enjoy going back to, because it's a different experience and because those works sit on and resonate in us differently.
Yeah, but just to add, Tim mentioned the performance first night, and it is a really good example, because I guess when we made it, we were in our, most of us, I think, like late 30s, 40s, and the personas in that show are kind of sort of based on like the sort of trope of a vaudevillian showgirl or entertainer, lots of makeup, enormous big fixed smiles, and the women wear these kind of like sequin dresses and enormous platform shoes. I mean, literally, so the bit under your toe is about that big and the heel is about that big. And of course, we were sort of having fun with these tropes of, you know, the vaudevillian entertainers when we were 39 or 40, but to come back and put those costumes on when you're in your 50s, and like, as Tim said, your body has changed, and certainly your ability to walk in porn star high-heeled shoes has changed. There's a whole. But of course, it was also really joyous to sort of to feel those personas who we were already playing as over the hill, as it were, be really, really over the hill.
Thank you. Real quick, a lot of this performance, to me, it was sort of about the way that you as a performer were interacting with the text and the words that someone else had put in your mouth. But I wanted to just sort of ask quickly about the inverse of that as well, and the experiences of, as a writer, having to almost surrender your text to the whims of a performer who might do whatever they want with the words you've put on the page.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, what I would say, I've been lucky enough working with Forced Entertainment as part of the group since we began in '84. Not to really have much of that separation, I think that sense that I would say writers have of being, a kind of voice that precedes the performance and has a kind of very separate existence from it. I think very often working with the company, let's say increasingly, writing's a funny business. I think I try not to write. Often writing is a few sentences or a few words, prompts. It might be me whispering to people while they're already talking about something, say this, go more in this direction, or it might be me signaling to people. And I think often text in the work emerges from a sort of very symbiotic co-authorship, quite tangled sort of process. So I'm generally not feeling like, oh, I've got something that I've done and now somebody else is going to interpret it. I'm much more thinking about the sort of the way that a text might be emerging between us, between all of us, between me and other people. And I guess in an instance like this one, where obviously I was writing, the key thing for me is that I'm writing with Terry's presence and Terry's voice in mind. Like we've worked together for, more than 40 years. And there's a sort of way in which I think, with all of the performers, there's a sort of energy and vocal mapping or kind of cohabitation or something. I don't know what the right word is. But I think, yeah, I can hear them if I'm writing, and I know I have some clues about where they might go with things and what might sit well with Terry or with Robin. They have different energies and presences, and I think it's just a very lucky position not to be in this relation of a writer who's writing for somebody they don't know, but actually being a writer who's working with language in a dialogue with people over an extraordinarily long period, and in which writing is not a kind of sealed off activity. It's something that takes place in the rehearsal room, and at best, I feel like I don't need to write anything. I shouldn't write anything, because I think it's important to me that things sit with people and come from the kind of energy and linguistic sort of base that they have. Coming to something like this, as I say, it's a bit different because I am writing, but I think I'm writing with this very full set of knowledges about how Terry is and how Terry might be with something like this.
I think we've got time for one more, Barbara. Yes.
Oh, it was on. Hello. That was fantastic. You could really, the trust between you both was quite palpable in the audience, I felt at least, which is really awesome. And I kind of want to ask about that. You guys, you've mentioned it already, but you've been working together for so long, and Forced Entertainment as a company and a collective has been going for a very long time. And all the stories I hear about people in collectives, it falls over horribly. How do you kind of maintain that environment and that trust and love and all that?
Well, I suppose we don't really know, in a way, how we keep going. But one of the answers that we give, which I think is fair enough, is that we are more or less polite. And what that means when you're working together is you tend not to say, that's a stupid idea. Or, so we've found ways of shifting any argument onto the material, objectifying the material, sort of following it through like a thing that's got its own logic and its own limits, but not just saying, no, that's shit. And that's been I suppose that's evolved as a way of talking, and it's kept a certain personal friction out of things. And for myself, I think, one of the brilliant things about working together with people for so long, and this fantastic kind of experiment that's been the company's body of work. And Robin and I were talking about this in the pub last night, I think. And is that even if you're really pissed off one day in rehearsal, you know that the way that things go with Forced Entertainment is that you can come in the next day and something completely unexpected might happen and change either your material or change your feeling about the material. Or even if you don't agree with what somebody is saying, you can feel that their argument has nonetheless shifted you a little bit. And I think that's a really, that's a great indulgence, well, not indulgence, a great gift, actually, to be in a situation where that is your kind of working method.
Rock solid relationship
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we also talk about is the ability we've developed to consider every work that we're making, you know, through a number of different lenses or through a number of different possible scenarios. So people don't necessarily get wedded to one articulation of the material. I think we all are quite good now at sort of saying, well, this could play out in a number of different ways, and we're going to basically work together in the studio to figure out which of these ways is the most appropriate or the most compelling. And in that process, you sort of you're passionate about everything, but you also are cool enough that you can sort of let something go because you realize that another version of what's been worked on is maybe the most dynamic or the most compelling. So that sort of ability to see forks in the road and to consider options that we have, I think is very, very useful. And the other thing is that we're all very, very used to being wrong. You know, we spend most of our time in the rehearsal room being wrong, not really understanding what we're doing, and not having a good grip on or a good set of tools for working on it. And eventually, over several months, 5-6 months it takes us to make a piece, we will hone those tools and understandings. But, even the most arrogant of us, the most certain and passionate about a certain idea, you're wrong most of the time. So in that sense, there's a kind of relaxed attitude to the discussions also, because even if you're fiercely arguing something, you know very well that the next day it may well turn out to be otherwise, and that's it's humbling. But I think it's a kind of humbling experience that we're all so used to now that we don't let the heat rise too high in the discussions, because even if you're arguing very fiercely for something, quite likely by Friday it will be out because you won't have really quite got the nuance.
Thank you so much for the generosity of what you shared with us. It's extraordinary. Thank you, Tim, for getting up. So I think it's not that early, is it, in Basel? 9:30?
It's not. No, it's not.
But you've got the whole day ahead of you. Exciting. Will you please join me in thanking both Terry and Tim for a wonderful hour spent together. I just want to do a few quick thank yous before we leave. The first is to the Rex Cramphorn Memorial Committee, which oversees the bequest. And I particularly want to note the late Derek Nicholson, who died late last year, was known to many people in this room. Derek was instrumental behind getting this whole thing up all those years ago and is very much missed. I also wanted to thank our colleagues at the Conservatorium of Music. This building, this venue has been refitted for the Conservatorium, who are now in residence here, and they've very generously allowed us to shoulder our way in here tonight, and it's great to be here. So thank you we've got some colleagues from the Conservatorium there. I'd also like to thank my colleagues in the discipline of theatre and performance studies, and in particular Barbara Campbell, who turned up at a meeting one day and said a great sentence. She said, "I was at the Venice Biennale and I bumped into Tim Etchells, and I wondered whether we might be able to invite them over here." And Barbara made it happen. So thank you so much, Barbara. And with the support of the other colleagues who are here tonight, so I think Glenn's here and Paul's here, I think Laura might be here, and Richard Manner, who's doing some documentation there. Also need to thank our friends at the Power Institute, who were very, very helpful with getting this on, and our head of school, Alan McKee, in the School of Art, Communication and English. And the last thing I will say is I think it's great to have a venue like this on campus, and it's very exciting that the university itself is getting behind engaging with cultural work in this city, and I hope that it happens a lot more. So thank you very much. Now please join us for refreshments in the courtyard out here. So if you want to come and have a drink and a little nibble of cheese. I don't know what's on the menu. That's at the exit that way. And if you're just heading home, straight down the steps there. Thank you again to our guests.